Baby, you are dying, I can see, but I will never let you go. I count your tears inside my head. They scream to me, don't let it go. Don't let it go. We stood at the gates of hell, shot the fire with water guns. And through the storms got our umbrellas, and through the sun inside each one we saw the sun.
For me, the Huntsville story started right here at Huntsville Animal Services back in 2013, when the live release rate for cats was only about 35%, and it wasn't much better for dogs. And the shelter director was insisting that it couldn't possibly ever get any better than that. Fortunately, that didn't turn out to be true. But the story of the true heroes who made it happen started long before that.
We had our dog euthanized on Earth Day of 2006. She had become trapped in a body that no longer served her well, so we euthanized her for reasons of mercy, and it was a terrible decision. And afterwards, I just really wasn't coping particularly well, so I started donating to the animal shelter in Huntsville once a month on the anniversary of her passing, just to, I guess, make myself feel better about what had happened to her and maybe help some other animals. And I had been doing that for a few months when I went on the website for the animal shelter and I saw a video promoting the animal shelter, and I decided to watch it, the thought being that if it was a good video, I would share it with other people to help encourage them to adopt animals. And as I was watching this video, it got to the point where there was footage of a beagle being taken from a kennel and walked down a hall. And the tone of the video changed, and I quickly realized what was happening was that they were filming a dog being taken from a kennel to be taken to a room to be destroyed. And from all outward appearances, this was a happy, healthy dog. He was a beagle. He was walking down a hall with someone wearing a leash, his tail wagging, completely oblivious to what was about to happen to him. I just could not stop the video quickly enough. And I was somewhat distraught the rest of the day, thinking that I had no idea that this was going on not a few miles from where I work. And I emailed the shelter the next day. I asked if the dog in the video had actually been destroyed. And the response that I got was that nobody wants beagles these days. And those 5 words are permanently etched into my brain as I realized that yes, in fact, a perfectly healthy and treatable dog that either was someone's beloved pet or could have been was destroyed for absolutely no good reason at all.
He got out of her backyard and was missing. And so I had to go down to Huntsville Animal Services to check that out. And all I needed to do was do a quick walkthrough of all the different aisles and see if Tucker was in there. And the more I kept going, just tears all of a sudden started streaming down my face. I started seeing the cards and noticing what was on cards, and I just thought, I'm never going to get to the end of this, and I'm going to collapse. I'm about to just be a puddle in the floor. And I really could not control my emotions. I just couldn't hardly breathe, and I was overwhelmed with the level of sadness, just the conditions, the smell. It just was painful. I actually had to make a phone call and talk to someone to compose myself to be able to drive.
My first experience really getting into the nitty-gritty of Huntsville Animal Services goes way, way back. I found out that there were a great number of animals that were killed. So that was back, I would say, I adopted an animal from Huntsville Animal Services. I guess that was my first Shih Tzu type breed in '93.
I actually was shocked because I think at the time I considered myself animal aware because I grew up with animals and I considered myself an animal lover. And I really thought in my own little bubble of reality that I was pretty hip to what was going on and I knew what was going on around me. And at that time, this was back in 2006, at that time I had a vague awareness that animals died in animal shelters. But I think that like most people, I thought that that happened because they were sick or because we just had too many of them and that there just were not homes for them. And it wasn't until 2006 when I realized that healthy treatable animals were being killed at the local shelter that I was just shocked. I thought I was aware, but I was clueless, and it shocked me and it angered me, and I felt a sense of betrayal because I think that like most people, I felt that my local animal shelter in a very progressive city was doing all it could to give animals in need an opportunity to get a new life, and I learned that that just wasn't the case at all.
You know, all they would have had to do is put it in the adoption area and they would have adopted that kitten out easily because she was sweet. She wasn't feral. I can't deal with stuff like that.
I had a couple of people contact me and tell me about what was going on at Huntsville Animal Services and how the numbers were bothersome, concerning, and upsetting. They just were concerned about the number of animals that went in and didn't come out.
Well, I can remember my very first opportunity to begin that learning process was actually when I was running for city council, and one of the questions I was asked in an interview was regarding the issue of animal control, and I realized I was completely and totally ignorant, and so I went over to animal control and met with Dr. Shepard and got to have a tour and got to learn about the work that they were doing, and that became the beginning of my educational experience.
Those of us that were animal people and were concerned formed groups and parties and started telling the city fathers, we think we can do better than that. The city and a lot of them had no idea.
Well, that was really when Aubrey got us organized, and I wanted to take part in that because I think we had a good cohesive group. She's very well spoken, and I can't remember a lot of the statistics like she can.
And I think that must be how I connected with Aubrey. And she invited me to come to one of the meetings when she found out what I was doing. And she sent me a copy of Nathan's book. And I read that, and I really connected. I connected with the need to use creative methods of thinking outside the box to make a difference in getting more animals out of shelters. That there are ways to do it, but we have to step outside of what we've always done and try new things. And at the core of that, in some form or another, is education.
There was a lengthy learning process for me after that because, like I said, prior to that, I thought I was pretty aware of what was going on around me, and I just really had no idea. And I think that that's typical. We presume the best. And once I found out what was happening locally, not just with that dog, but with other dogs, after having spoken to some other people about how the animal shelter operates and being told, oh no, this is very common, they just can't save them all, I got angry, I got mad, but then I had to channel that into something. I mean, here, on one hand, we had just had our dog euthanized for reasons of mercy, and I know exactly what the word euthanasia means. It's not for convenience, it's to prevent or alleviate suffering. And here, this healthy and treatable dog, his life had been ended, but they were also calling it euthanasia. The two actions had nothing at all in common. One was for mercy and one was for convenience. So I took both my grief over the loss of our dog and my anger and just decided to start educating myself. I, like most people do, I started Googling. I started looking around on the internet, and I started reading articles, and I just kind of stewed in it for a while because I didn't know what, as an individual, I could do about it myself. And I decided to take what I had learned and essentially be a town crier and essentially tell everyone I knew. Because I figured they were like me, that many people, whether or not people should know what's happening at their local animal shelters with their money and in their name, and in many cases while they're being blamed for that process, most people just don't. So I decided I was going to take what I learned and I was going to share it far and wide and hopefully get the attention of other people, because governments function using our money based on our wishes. They're supposed to be serving us in our name. And I figured the only way anything was going to change was if we all educated ourselves, stood up together and said, enough, not with our money, not in our name, because it's just not necessary.
The members of No Kill Huntsville took their jobs of educating themselves on the topic of animal sheltering very seriously. Over a period of years, they attended conferences, read books, and connected with and learned from successful no-kill animal shelter directors. What they learned, they shared with their community, including Huntsville Animal Services. And what they learned should have been inspiring, because what they learned was not only that the massive amount of killing taking place at the municipal animal shelter was unnecessary, they also learned specifically what things the shelter needed to do in order to stop the killing. Furthermore, the things that needed to be done were not particularly complicated or even controversial. They required work and commitment on the part of the shelter management to do, for sure, but they were not really all that difficult to do. A side note, if you would like more information about what needed to be done, check out my video, Getting to No Kill. You might think that animal shelter staff and rescue organizations would have been thrilled to learn that there's a relatively easy way to stop the killing of more than 6,000 animals at their local animal shelter. But as you will see, that didn't happen. Instead, the advocates for No Kill Huntsville were maligned, ridiculed, and worse.
There's a saying that nobody likes change except a baby with a wet diaper. And I remember that frequently in my public service efforts. I just had that conversation with someone this morning about even a good project. Even a good project is change. And so it needs to be managed very carefully. And you can be prepared for resistance, because people don't like moving out of their comfort zone, even if it means moving to a better place.
Years ago, tried to deal with the director of animal services, and even apparently sent her to conferences and things. And she came back with the attitude, it can't be done, it's impossible. And so I think that has been hard, for No Kill, for the group and for the leadership.
We had always talked about supportive and polite and courteous and, really watching ourselves so that we weren't thought of as just crazy animal people, but that we were taken seriously.
We did our best, and if we sent a letter to somebody, we would go over it amongst ourselves to make sure there wasn't anything that was counterproductive or nasty. No name calling. We never did that.
And we did it as positively as we could, but even to this day, there are some people that see us in a completely negative light just because of the message. And it's common for people like me to say very diplomatically, please stop doing this, there's another way. There is no polite way to say, please stop killing animals with my money, and for no one to be offended. But that's because people they can't separate the personal from the professional. our focus has always been about municipal accountability, and it's never been about individuals. We're talking about a city department that runs with tax dollars for the benefit of a community. And it's not just the city of Huntsville, it functions for the Madison County as well. So it's always been about how a department operates.
We were actually called terrorists.
They were told that we were troublemakers. And so the volunteers and the employees. And so a lot of them decided that we were, without even knowing us.
So I think it was a combination of that. It was the personalities of who was already deeply involved and the seeds that had been planted before we ever existed. And so there was just this resistance.
There is a phenomenon where people learn what's happening at their local animal shelter, and some people become outraged, but some people, for whatever reason, they are so entrenched mentally with the status quo that they defend it. It's actually a form of cognitive dissonance, where people tell themselves, I don't want animals to die at my local animal shelter using my money, but then they go on to rationalize the fact that that's happening. So we had a lot of opposition from people that were shelter supporters who were just firmly convinced that there was no other way to function, that we were on some type of witch hunt to get the shelter director fired. We were naive, we were clueless, we couldn't possibly understand the challenges being faced at the animal shelter. So there were shelter supporters and volunteers who felt that way. And the most surprising source of opposition that we had, which to this day is really quite sad, was from within the rescue community. I think that people that are not in the trenches, as we would say, of animal welfare advocacy, think that people that advocate for animals all get along and we're all sitting around holding hands singing Kumbaya, and it's just not that way. There are people in the rescue community that work incredibly hard to save animals, and one would think that upon being told, hey, there's a different way to function and these animals don't have to die, that they'd be on board with that and they'd be all about being part of that change. And while some certainly were, that wasn't our experience at all. We had incredible opposition. At one point, there was actually what we refer to as a hate page that was set up on Facebook. It used a parody of our logo. It reposted almost all of our posts that we put on Facebook with negative and hostile comments. And probably the worst content that was ever on that page was, we had worked a series of short videos that were public service announcements for television, in which used my voice to help promote the no-kill message in the community. Again, in a very positive way. There was nothing negative about what we did. And someone in this group on this hate page had taken the time to download a copy of the PSA from a YouTube channel. They extracted my voice from it, and they used some type of program, I don't even know where they got it, to create a video that made it sound like I was speaking out of an animal's rectum. And here we were in No Kill Huntsville making all these great pains and efforts to be incredibly diplomatic and respectful and be very careful about word choice and be very careful about our billboards that we displayed in town on electronic billboards to have positive messaging, and that behavior is not reciprocated. The people that were in opposition to us engaged in what I can best describe as hostile, juvenile, and toxic behavior, which really ultimately served no purpose.
That was my biggest surprise, besides being called a terrorist. That was my biggest surprise. I just never, ever imagined that there was such a big divide there and that people's passion could drive them to that point.
I think it's common to ascribe negative connotations to the messenger for the fact that the message is necessary in the first place.
What I think we felt like they were thinking, what we don't know will hurt us. So we just don't want to know about it.
You can't unring the bell. Once you know that something's happening, you can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to go on with the rest of my life. I think a lot of us come to advocacy because of something that happens to us personally, and once you know, you can't unknow. And for me, it became a moral imperative that some way I was going to try to find something I could do to be part of change, even in a small way.
And then John Hamilton became the city administrator.
When I got to the city and in meeting with people who were on the front lines of animal welfare and dealing with the public and so forth, I think they just felt worn out and defeated. And when John Hamilton came in, it gave him a breath of fresh air and a burst of energy.
And our biggest shining light that made us breathe a sigh of relief was actually in 2014. We had a meeting with John Hamilton, who was the new city administrator for the city of Huntsville. And in our first meeting with him to talk about no-kill philosophies and programs, he said, well, you had me at hello. I mean, he was on board. He understood.
And he was very much, we can do this, and, we are going to do this, and, has been very involved.
We had spent years being logical and pragmatic and calm and respectful, and we thought, okay, well, here's this retired colonel. Maybe here's the guy that we can finally talk to, and we were able to. And it was after we met with him and had a series of meetings with city officials that combined with public support for our mission that had been expressed to City Hall, that things started moving really quickly.
Solutions that didn't cost the city money, that would actually make money for them. And I think some of them finally started to figure that out because they were spending more to house, feed, care for, pay employees to take care of, and kill those animals when they would have made a lot more getting an adoption fee.
We had taken the elements of the no-kill equation and broken down what the city was currently doing as compared to what other places were doing. In other words, this is where we are now, but this is what we could do, with very specific ideas and indicating things that wouldn't cost any more. And we had always spoken of the equation in equation form, which is the way it's written about in Redemption. At a later meeting, John Hamilton, who was very involved at this point, he did a lot of work and he got up to speed really quickly. He did a PowerPoint presentation, and part of his PowerPoint presentation was he took the no-kill equation and he created a drawing that looked, to me, it looks like the Parthenon in Greece. It had a foundation, it had columns. In other words, it was set up like this building, and he had outlined what elements were foundation elements, and then the columns were different things that you would do after you built your foundation, and then the roof just kind of kept it all protected. But it was very interesting that he took the equation and put it in that form. We've heard of the equation referred to as a recipe, as like cogs in a machine, and he presented it as a building, but it was all the same thing, because the thing about the equation is you can't pick and choose. You can't just say it's all about spay and neuter. If it was all about spay and neuter and that was it, gosh, this would be easy. You can't just say it's all about rescue groups taking animals out of the shelter. All these things have to work together to function, and when he showed us that diagram, what that showed us was that he understood. When we really saw measurable change was at the end of that first year, the live release rate went from about 40% when he first came on to above 70% within that first year. So they had essentially almost doubled the live release rate in less than a year. And it was the following year, 2015, when the city first hit a live release rate of 90% for both dogs and cats, when we calculate those numbers separately, and it has maintained that level since that time. It has not fallen back.
I love the idea of moving away from the old pound concept to not just animal control, but we call it animal services, because that's really what it is. It's serving owners, it's serving the pets, those who are responsible, those who want to adopt, as well as educating those who may need to better understand how to care for their animals. So it contributes all together to the quality of life of the entire community and how we care for each other.
The approach with the public that we're all in it together, and these are precious animals, and they're sources of unconditional love, and they have, they can do wonderful things, and they deserve a chance to live. And again, to make those changes, you don't have to rebuild the shelter.
But that's what it takes. Mike, it's like the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we were, I guess, the squeaky wheel, and Aubrey in particular, I'll give her, just can't say enough praise for her.
It's hard to hear it in those terms because it was never about me. I mean, I took a tragedy in my life, and I wanted to make something positive out of it. And I have always considered myself very outspoken. I mean, it's just part of who I am, and I think the Army made it worse, to be honest. I mean, the Army turned me into somebody that just really has strong feelings about free speech and personal responsibility. If the fact that I had a personal tragedy led me to an awareness that I otherwise might not have had, and that awareness led me to decide that I had to be a change maker and invite other people to be part of that, and the end result is that I'm now sitting in a city that's probably the safest place for animals in the entire state of Alabama, and maybe even in this region, I'm really proud of that. I am. I would like to think that it's part of my legacy.
Those who have followed the transition to no-kill in other communities will likely recognize some of the remarkable similarities between those and the Huntsville no-kill story. In each case, change has required local citizen advocates rising up and demanding that the killing in the animal shelter stops. And in each case, when they've done that, defenders of the status quo have attacked and maligned the advocates for simply having the audacity to expect animal shelters to, actually be shelters that provide safe harbor for homeless pets. That has been universally true in each of the hundreds of communities that have made the transition to no-kill so far. Another thing that has been universally true has been a need for a change in leadership, because it's exceptionally rare for a shelter manager or director that has been mired in the old catch-and-kill model of animal sheltering to undergo the dramatic paradigm shift that's needed to begin valuing the lives of animals that they're accustomed to treating as disposable. In this case, the leadership change came about as the result of a new city administrator being hired. As much as the Huntsville story has been similar to other communities, there are some interesting aspects of this story that make it unique, in part because even though Huntsville Animal Services has had a live release rate of more than 90% for years, it still is not yet no-kill, as this recent news story demonstrates.
New tonight at 10. Time is running out for these 8 dogs at the Huntsville Animal Shelter who will be destroyed in just 2 days if they're not adopted.
They come in here and they start deteriorating, and it's sad.
Karen Buchanan works at the Huntsville Animal Shelter and can tell when a dog is what she calls going downhill.
Getting extremely stressed with the barking and just pacing back and forth, the circles.
She says these 8 dogs have reached that point. Buchanan told me some of them have been in the shelter since April, and while they're not dangerous dogs, if no one adopts them, they'll be destroyed Saturday. She told me this isn't an uncommon situation in a shelter environment, but No-Kill Huntsville spokesperson Aubrey Kavanaugh doesn't support it.
We realize that when some dogs have been at the shelter for a period of time, they develop kennel stress, but we just honestly object to putting an expiration date on healthy dogs.
Kavanaugh said she wants the shelter to give its dogs more outdoor time and tell the public more positive things about them before considering putting them down.
The dogs in this news story are consistent with other healthy animals still being killed in Huntsville. I received email from the shelter director before my visit that have attempted to excuse the killing of dogs like these by saying that the shelter doesn't have the resources to help large, energetic dogs that develop stress from being in their kennels. I was, therefore, very surprised to find several large outdoor play yards for dogs at the shelter during my visit. Yards where shelter dogs could have and should have been out playing, but that were empty and not being used. We went back again, and again the play yards were empty. Advocates there say that this is common, And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that more effectively utilizing these extensive outdoor play yards would dramatically reduce the stress of dogs living at the shelter. There are, in fact, a host of simple things animal shelters can do to alleviate kennel stress in shelter dogs. Things that Huntsville shelter is not doing or is doing minimally. In fact, prior to my trip to Huntsville, another dog at the Huntsville shelter was at risk of being destroyed for kennel stress. So I shared a video that I had made about alleviating kennel stress in shelter dogs. But the shelter director refused to even watch it, instead writing on Facebook that she wouldn't watch it because, in effect, she doesn't like me. Said another way, while change has happened in the leadership at the city, staff at the shelter continue to resist even the most obvious and simple changes that would save more lives, like simply making better use of the dog play yards they already have so that dogs don't get so stressed out so quickly at the shelter. Over the years, I have watched as the Huntsville shelter staff have been dragged, often kicking and screaming the whole way, to the precipice of no-kill. I mean, the killing is dramatically less than it used to be, but they aren't there yet, because they're still killing healthy animals for, well, no good reason at all. That means the official no-kill celebration in Huntsville has yet to happen. People who have watched my film on the Lake County no-kill story know that when Lake County stopped killing, the tensions between the shelter and the animal advocates vanished. In Lake County, the shelter now embraces the advocates who brought change to their community, and the advocates are now some of the shelter's most vocal supporters. There, the wounds and hurt feelings from years of debate about the shelter are gone and healed, and the community has moved on to a much better place. On the other hand, staff at the Huntsville shelter have, so far, been unable or unwilling to drop the old catch and kill paradigm and still hold grudges, even as city officials have worked to manage them differently so as to achieve dramatically better outcomes. And because healthy animals are still being killed, unnecessary tension remains between the shelter and the advocates. It is, after all, the killing of healthy animals in a shelter that creates these conflicts. And they won't go away until the killing stops. It's only a matter of time before the transition in Huntsville is complete. Advocates at No Kill Huntsville won't be popping the cork on any celebratory champagne until it does, because while things are dramatically better than they used to be, the lives of animals like these are still worth fighting for. I should also add that No Kill Huntsville has not only worked tirelessly to change the culture in their home city and county, they have also been working to help animal advocates across the country to reform their own animal shelters. And more recently, Aubrey Kavanaugh published a book about their experience to help other people even more. Titled, Not Rocket Science, A Story of No-Kill Animal Shelter Advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama, the book is a must-read for animal advocates wanting to stop killing at their local animal shelters. It is available from Amazon.com. There are currently more than 140 cities and counties where all of the animal shelters have stopped killing, thanks to advocates like those at No Kill Huntsville. As more people join the no-kill movement, it's just a matter of time before animal shelters everywhere become truly safe havens for homeless pets.
The approach with the public that we're all in it together, and these are precious animals, and they're sources of unconditional love, and they have, they can do wonderful things, and they deserve a chance to live.
Baby, you're amazing. so amazing. Until I take my dying breath, I will never let you go.